Japan is one of the major powers in the world today, yet very little is written about it in the mainstream media all over the world. The country is more or less ignored, despite its economic and potential political importance. And we're very glad to have with us today Karel van Wolferen, one of the great Western experts on Japan, whose first book, The Enigma of Japanese Power, was published in 1988, and he has subsequently written 30 more books. Karel, welcome. Japan, when you reached it, had already witnessed the turbulence that accompanied the signing of the Japanese-US Security Pact, which was opposed by the students and others. Many people in Japanese civil society opposed it.
It was an awareness of Japanese subjugation to the United States. But today, I think this is sort of disappeared into the distant past. It's still referred to, but people do not really fully remember what it was actually all about.
Though at the time, in the 50s and the 60s, I remember very well, the Japanese student movement was a model for us. The thing that differentiated the Japanese from both the Turks and the Koreans was that the aim was very clear. They did not want to be a vassal state, a protectorate of the United States. And, not forgetting that this was happening about less than a decade after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then the Japanese ruling elite managed somehow to override this process. How did that happen?
It was, you see, the security treaty basically is...
Of 1951.
Yes, right. It's basically a base lease agreement. The people who were then at the top, who were in charge, had already decided that Japan should redevelop its industrial power under the umbrella of American protection, so that they would not have to function as a state, worrying about defense, worrying about diplomacy, worrying about anything, that they could just simply concentrate on reconstructing the economy, the economic base, and to set up a system of unlimited expansion of productive capacity. That was in the 50s. It was designed in the mid-50s. And so the elite, the political elite, had decided we need this American protection.
But let's say they decided the opposite. Would the Americans have let them?
It's very clear that Americans then, and of course ever since, once they have decided that a country is part of their informal empire, they do not easily let go of it. And it maybe could have been maneuvered differently by the political elite, but you see, the Japanese were very lucky. The war in Korea gave them the money because the Americans were buying stuff in Japan to meet the demands, military demands and others. And that was a kind of, it's very important, it was like, in some ways like the Marshall Plan in Europe, but it was also, it was like a Keynesian machine underneath the economy. And they were allowed by the US to organize things at home the way they wanted to. So they weren't a colony that had to obey dictates about domestic organization from outside. The Japanese ruling class has, as it were, forgotten the meaning of sovereignty. It's not part of their vocabulary. It's not part of what the editors at the major newspapers, how they interpret the world and the place of their own country in it and so on. And that is a major problem. Because even though, in Western Europe you have similar vassal status, which has really recently been demonstrated very well with these sanctions against Russia and this demonization of Putin, etc., just following American demands. In that respect, the Europeans and the Japanese are similar, but in Europe, although because of the European Union there's a question about sovereignty, of course, also, nevertheless, you can fall back on, the rhetoric of sovereignty, etc.
The political structure that was effectively created in Japan in the late 50s, 60s, 70s was de facto a one-party state run by the Liberal Democratic Party, which kept getting elected and re-elected and re-elected. This was conscious, of course.
The problem with this party system was that the Red Purge, which was an occupation activity, the Red Purge against teachers who had been allied with leftist causes and with the Communist Party.
There was a huge purge.
There was a very big purge because it eliminated a lot of the brains that should have been active and should have been, politically organizing themselves, and this didn't happen. And then we had this, the Liberal Party and the Democratic Party. Of course, you must have ignored the titles that mean nothing. And it was the business community that decided, all right, you merge, and once you merge, we will make sure that you stay in business. So this then, brings you to the way in which the whole system was organized. What is the structure? And you see a very important thing is that there is no clear separation of private and public sectors. This is very important to understand the whole system. And then you had a kind of I have a whole array of small businesses and even medium-sized businesses that could be said, this is a private sector. But the big ones, no, they're part of not as companies so much, but the way they're organized. They have these federations, and the top of these organizations the same as the top of the bureaucracies. They've gone to school together, etc. It's the same kind of elite. And so the LDP was headed then by people with a very clear purpose. And that purpose rested on public agreement. I mean, there was no question about it, that the Japanese public as a whole
consented.
Absolutely. And they saw, of course, the progress they made, because they were extremely successful. They were also very, very talented and capable. I mean, what you see in Europe, a rise to top levels of essentially incompetent people. Japan was completely the opposite. The success of Japan was expressed in GDP figures. The growth of GDP was, it was still called GNP in those days. It was understood that was it.
Just a few years ago, the LDP was defeated by the JDP, yes. Which was a split, but also had new people who wanted Japan to become a little more independent, who were fed up with the arrangement of a permanent US occupation of Okinawa. And this government and its prime minister were rapidly removed on the behest of the United States.
Yeah, basically that's true. But you know, they had been LDP politicians, and the people that joined them, because they were so successful in early elections that they didn't have politicians to put on the seats that they won in elections. So they were welcoming people who were inexperienced, and this was disastrous, former Socialist Party members, and they had always been hopeless, because they were like you could compare them to a Greek choir, you know, lamenting from the sidelines the sorry state of the world, the sorry state of Japan, but never doing anything. They were just commenting on things. And they could be relied upon not to ever try to, you know, form a government or to even become credible enough so that they would have this opportunity. So that was bad for the Minsto, that is the DPJ. And the people who were the most serious about becoming what Hatoyama, the first prime minister of this party, said more equal. He was talking about sovereignty without using that terminology. And that was immediately shot down. Behind Hatoyama, the first prime minister, you had a political genius, Ozawa, who had been the victim of a character assassination campaign that had gone on for a long time. And because he would otherwise have been a prime minister. And he was a political genius, there's no question about it in my mind. He filled a couple of jumbo jets with diplomats, with authors, artists, all manner of people, flew them to China for the purpose of closer relations, party to party and people to people relations. And of course, you can imagine, this gave Washington the jitters. That was not the way in which Japan should behave. And after all, this was when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and they just decided on this pivot to Asia, which essentially is an effort to help contain China. And so this is what was the undoing of this reformist political effort, essentially, because it was clear that Hatoyama had to go, and they tried to overthrow Hatoyama. They did so through a ruse. Hatoyama walked into a trap. He was given to believe there was a compromise in the work about the military bases
in Okinawa.
And that was clear. Hatoyama himself will tell you that it was the biggest mistake in his political life. Unfortunately, because that was an opportunity for a Japanese government to set a few things straight about its role in the world. You know, we have our own foreign policy towards China. We don't need to consult the United States on this. We want to be part of this idea of ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries, +3, Korea, China, and Japan. And we want to be friends with the United States, no question about that. But let us be our own country, and and the interesting thing is that Hatoyama, new prime minister of a new political party who had broke with 1/2 century of one-party democracy, this was the end of one-party democracy, the first prime minister asks a new American prime minister, president, who just become president, who also comes up with, you know, we're going to change all this. Hatoyama suggests, let's sit down together and talk about the future of Asia. He asked again and again, and there was a spokesman in Washington, not even someone of any name, any level, who said, well, if the Japanese prime minister wants to settle problems at home, he shouldn't bother our president with it. Insulting in a way that, you know, you have never seen this anywhere. And so the Japanese media swallowed this. It didn't even register in a way it should have. But that was the attitude of Washington then. And they made Japan feel, look, you know, we know you have this new government, but Secretary of Defense Gates visits Japan, and he demonstratively refuses to attend a banquet given in his honor. All very clear indications, look, you're a new government, but we don't really think you are the right kind of government. And this is very bad. But, you know, Japanese don't, it doesn't register, especially in the media, where now you have a media that is very scared of Abe because there have been lots of new arrangements that have made the media fearful. The top of NHK, that is the Japanese BBC, very important in the scheme of things, very important in, say, the creation of political reality in Japan, was replaced, and they put in an appointee by Abe. And my friends at NHK tell me it's awful. You know, it's really censorship, self-censorship.
It's just like here, by the way.
And
it's not so different.
no, well, but this is so, you know, the Asahi Shimbun, the Asahi newspaper, which was the most important check on a prime minister and on a government, that was also something that stood in the way of Abe's grand designs. There is it's now, I think, already a year old, a campaign to undo the credibility of that newspaper, and they are scared. These top editors are scared. And you know, I talk with them, some of them, and it's a world that is, at this moment, a very great problem. But, if you want me to continue about the current situation, Abe has these ideas of, that are normally described by the outside world as right-wing and nationalistic and all that, which is true, of course. But they are not, these ideas are not part of a feasible strategy. He doesn't have a strategy. He has a vague idea, a fantasy of what Japan should be, could be. It's all, you know, words, it's all you know, advertising language, as it were. There's nothing, also there's nothing for people to hang their heads on. It's, and it's not very credible. So, and what he is doing, because of his earlier successes, by the way, successes in passing unpopular things that are essentially at the behest of the United States, with a new Japanese Security Council, with new arrangements, and now, of course, this is the hottest potato ever, changing an interpretation of the Constitution, this no war, that Japan could could come to the aid of, you know, of American military doing something. And this is where he may overextend himself. And there is last night I talked with someone, an ordinary person, ordinary citizen, but who has her ears to the ground, and she said it's really strange atmosphere. It's really changed from a few months ago, partly because three very prominent constitutional scholars have come out and said, you can't do this. This is very unconstitutional. And since then, 226 historians and scholars in various related fields have come out with a manifesto saying, you know, this is not the right way. So for the first time, this has also ignited the newspapers, etc. And they've now, there is a discussion. They have regular demonstrations every Friday. Last Friday there were 30,000 people outside the parliament, etc.
What about nuclear weapons? What about the desire of many Japanese politicians and the Japanese military not to be left out in that region?
This is not something people talk about. It's generally understood, I think, by people that they don't have them, but they could have them in a very short time. That they, in other words, everything is ready for nuclear weapons to be developed.
Carol, let me just describe to you a conversation I had several years ago, during the beginnings of the Iraq War, with a senior American official. We debated in public, in private. She said, you know, maybe you're right. I mean, different tone. I said, forget the Middle East for a minute. Let's discuss the Far East. I said, it appeared that during the Clinton period, Albright had been to North Korea, there'd been a virtual agreement to unite the Korean Peninsula, not like Germany, more softly, a softer reunification gradually. And I said the only real break with Clinton's policies that you people have carried out under Cheney and Rumsfeld and Bush is to stop that. She said yes. And I said, do you mind telling me why? She said, yes, I'll tell you why. It's very straightforward for us. She said, you don't know the South Korean generals, we do. And when you talk to them about reunification, the rest is irrelevant to them, but there's a gleam in their eyes because they know that a unified Korea will be a nuclear state. She said, if the unified Koreans have nuclear weapons, China has nuclear weapons, India has nuclear weapons, Pakistan has nuclear weapons, how the hell are we, if the Koreans get them to, going to stop the Japanese from getting them? And the only way to stop the Japanese is to come down hard on the reunification.
Well, it is described as a unified Korea would be like a dagger pointed at the soft underbelly of Japan. And people who were hoping for reunification, you'd say to them, well, know what you're hoping for, because this is going to upset everything in such a major way. You can't predict anything. I don't see this happening anytime very soon.
No. What is the state of the Japanese intelligentsia? Because here too, there's been a big shift. I mean, this was a country very political. Regardless of who ruled the country, underneath that, you had a very vigorous, strong, powerful, critical intelligentsia.
My impression is that there is a general sense of hopelessness and helplessness. You know, what can we do about it? Shikataganai. Shikataganai means it cannot be helped. And before 1993, I used to, with lectures and in what I was writing, I used to say that shikataganai is the most important term in the Japanese political vocabulary. It cannot be helped. Can't do anything about it. And then in '93 was this political upheaval that gave birth to this first party to challenge the LDP. And what happened then is very interesting, because the idea that fundamental political change was necessary, that was of course generally accepted, but then it was also accepted that it is possible, not just necessary, but possible. And that's what happened after '93, and that saw the birth of this reformist political movement. And you didn't hear shikataganai anymore, but now it's back, because it failed. I know that behind the scenes there are people in the LDP who are, of course, looking at the moment that Abe is going to fall, which he will at some point, maybe because of overextending himself. He's very, you know, his popularity, and this again is such a strange thing, because on a general level of the common man in the street, the fact that he was invited to come and speak before the American Congress is a sign of Japanese strength, which it's exactly the opposite. That's how they interpreted it. So his popularity is okay, but then this new business that is fueled by these scholars and these constitutional scholars and these historians, etc., have created a political movement that, if it lasts, and if it lasts into the autumn of this year, it could help dethrone him.
What about US policy in the region now, both in terms of constructing this new base in Australia, the sort of semi-encirclement of China, the fact that even the US Congress is unhappy with the new version of the TPP, they voted against it. I mean, what exactly is going on in the American policymakers' mind on what they're going to do in Asia over the next year?
Well, of course, they're ignorant. I mean, Congress is ignorant, by and large. But also the people who are writing the foreign policy script, those neocons and those liberal hawks, those are to responsibility to protect people. They are ignorant about things they ought to know, and they think they know very well, but only if it fits into their
scheme.
They have free rein because the Washington Post and the New York Times essentially is just repeating what they say. But suppose that you are an editor or a journalist working for any of those main newspapers and you analyze it in that way, the likelihood that you hold on to your job for any length of time is very small. And you know, at the moment, journalism is an occupation threatened by you know, it's not a seller's market. It's so what you do have is a kind of underground, supposedly underground, internet-based kind of a samizdat publishing, but it's uneven, it's not coordinated, and it is also very often not very well informed.
Carol, if I were to ask you, in conclusion, where will Japan be in 10 years' time? What would be your reply?
I don't know. But I can tell you what I hope. Of course, I hope for a general awakening. I'm not sure who would be the main... I mean, I just heard, again yesterday, that one of the LDP bigwigs who is preparing for a major critical attack on Abe is Kame. Kame is a strange figure. He is a former policeman and a very big, but a popular figure. And what sets him apart from practically everybody else, he is very solidly against the death penalty. And he was considered right-wing, but I always liked him. And one time I was on a TV program together with him, and I really liked him. Because you're dealing here with somebody who not only has, I think, his heart in the right place with many things that count, but also a man of integrity. And so there are several others. There are people who were important in the beginnings of this Democratic Party of Japan, DPJ, that's lost. And they were the original ones, the original founders. And there are some who still are in the Diet, some of them, in Parliament. And they haven't disappeared. Can they come back together again in some way? This is what people like them, and when I meet them, because I know quite a few of them, that's what you discuss. Is there a possibility for these political figures to get together? It doesn't look very good at the moment, but who knows?
But I noticed that when you speak of alternatives, you basically talk about the LDP, people from within the JDP, etc. That means you exclude any possibility of something new arising from, say, the left, like we are seeing in some of the Mediterranean countries in Europe today.
I haven't seen anything like this. The Japanese left was betrayed by Japanese leftists, by the Socialist Party. And the Communist Party, unfortunately, it's a party with politicians of great integrity. I've gone out with some of these candidates when they do their campaigning. They are unanimously loved wherever you go in constituencies. They're very reliable, but as a party, they stick to, you know, ancient communist lines that make them impossible to work with.
Might not something emerge from within them or their periphery?
That people are still waiting for, you know, and I doubt it very much, because it becomes a, you know, these are institutions that continue to live their own lives, and there is not a threat to their existence, and as long as there is no threat to their existence, they just continue. Because doing something that is out of the ordinary may threaten them.
Carol, on that note, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Oh, it was my pleasure to do this.
Yeah. Thank you.